The dust of redemption settled in Jedediah Cain's throat, a taste as bitter as memory. He rode not as a marshal, but as something less, a hunter of men, whose own soul was long past saving. The town was a raw scar on the face of the Alkali Flats, a place where hope came to die. And today, it was dying loudly. Gunshots cracked the midday stillness, their echoes bouncing off the false fronts of the saloon and the general store. People scattered like quail, their screams swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. Jedediah dismounted his hand, hovering over the worn grip of his Colt. His knuckles were white, a single bead of sweat tracing a clean line through the grime on his temple. He saw them, then Silas Cain's men, positioned with the cold precision of wolves cornering a calf. Two on the rooftops, one by the horse trough, another guarding the door to the Redemption Bank and Trust. And inside, where the real damage was being done, was Cain himself. This wasn't a smash-and-grab raid. It was a performance. Calculated. Cruel. Jedediah had been tracking Cain for 3 weeks, following a trail of broken safes and shattered lives from the Colorado border. The bounty was substantial, but it was the man's methods that gnawed at him. Cain didn't just rob, he dismantled. He found a town's weakness, a greedy mayor, a drunken sheriff, a secret debt, and he pulled it apart thread by thread before taking what he wanted. Jedediah moved low and fast, using a water wagon for cover. He was a man of few words, a relic of a time when the law was a simple, brutal equation. Now men like Cain made it a game of intellect and sadism. From his vantage point, he could see through the bank's large window. Silas Cain stood in the center of the lobby, not with a gun in his hand, but with an air of theatrical command. He was a stark contrast to his rough-hewn gang, tall and slender, dressed in a black frock coat that was impeccably clean despite the dust. His voice, though muffled by the glass, carried a chilling eloquence. Inside, the bank manager, a portly man named Abernathy, trembled behind the counter, his face the color of spoiled milk. "The main vault is on a timer," he stammered, sweat plastering his hair to his scalp. Silas smiled, a thin, predatory curve of his lips. "Time," he mused, "is a river, Mr. Abernathy. It sweeps away the insignificant, but reveals the stones that lie beneath. I am not interested in your vault. I am interested in your safe. The small one. The one where you keep items of sentimental value." Abernathy's eyes widened in confusion and terror. Silas's men had already emptied the cash drawers. This made no sense. One of the outlaws slammed the butt of his rifle onto the counter. "Do as he says." With fumbling hands, Abernathy unlocked the small iron-banded safe tucked beneath his desk. Silas knelt beside him, his movements fluid and unhurried. He ignored the stacks of bonds and deeds of title, his gloved fingers searching for something specific. Jedediah watched, his gut tightening. This was wrong. This was personal. Then Silas found it. He withdrew a small object, holding it up to the light filtering through the grimy window. It was a silver locket, oval-shaped and tarnished with age, hanging from a delicate chain. Jedediah's breath hitched. He would know that locket anywhere. The intricate etching of a single rose on its cover. The small, almost invisible dent on its edge where it had fallen once long ago. It was his wife's, Sarah's. The world seemed to fall silent around him. The gunshots, the screams, the frantic energy of the robbery, it all faded into a dull roar. That locket contained the only portrait he had left of her, a miniature painted in happier times before the shadows had fallen over their lives. He had pawned it a month ago, in a moment of utter desperation, his pockets empty, and his pride in tatters, swearing to himself he would buy it back. He had told Abernathy to keep it safe, to not sell it under any circumstances. Silas Cain snapped the locket open, his gaze lingering on the portrait within. He looked directly toward the window, his eyes seeming to pierce through the glass and find Jedediah's. He held it up, a silent toast to the ghost between them. The message was as clear as a gunshot in a silent church. I know who you are. I know what you've lost. And I have come to take the rest. Rage, cold and pure, surged through Jedediah. It wasn't the hot, reckless fury of a young man, but the focused, deadly anger of someone who had nothing left to lose. He drew his Colt, the motion so smooth and practiced, it was almost an unconscious thought. But before he could get a clear shot, one of Kane's rooftop lookouts spotted him. Marshal, or... the man yelled, though the title hadn't belonged to Jedediah in years. A bullet splintered the wood of the wagon inches from his head. The performance was over. Silas slipped the locket into his coat pocket, his smile never wavering, and backed toward the door. His men laid down a barrage of covering fire bullets, chewing through the storefronts and kicking up clouds of dust. Jedediah returned fire, the familiar buck of the Colt, a grim comfort in his hand. He dropped one of the men on the roof, the body tumbling into the street with a sickening thud. But it was too late. Under the cover of chaos, Silas and his remaining men were on their horses, galloping out of town, leaving behind a trail of terror and one very specific, very personal wound. Jedediah clutched his side, a searing pain, blooming where a stray piece of shrapnel from a ricochet had torn through his duster. The physical hurt was nothing. It was the gaping void left by the theft of that silver locket that truly crippled him. Silas Kane hadn't just robbed a bank. He had stolen the last piece of Jedediah's heart. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and regret. Dr. Evans, a man whose gentle hands and weary eyes had seen more suffering than any 10 men, should stitch the gash in Jedediah's side with methodical care. "You're lucky," the doctor said, his voice a low murmur. "An inch to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation with the undertaker." Jedediah didn't respond. He stared at the ceiling. The image of Silas Kane holding Sarah's locket burned into his mind. The small room felt suffocating, each tick of the wall clock a hammer blow against his skull. That was Silas Kane, Sheriff Brody stated from the doorway. He was a man carved from the land itself, leathery and tough, with a wisdom that ran deeper than his folksy drawl suggested. "Heard you've been on his trail." "Wasn't his trail I was on?" Jedediah grunted, wincing as Dr. Evans tightened a bandage. "Just the bounty." "Well, it's personal now, ain't it?" Brody said, his gaze knowing. "Abernathy told me what Kane took. Just the one thing, your wife's locket." Jedediah's jaw tightened. The memory of pawning it was a fresh shame. He'd needed money for supplies, for another bottle to dull the edges of his past. He had failed her in life, and now he was failing her in death. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome, ambushed him. Sarah's face, not as it was in the locket's portrait, smiling and full of light, but as it was in the end, pale and thin, her eyes clouded with a sadness he had put there. "You're not here anymore, Jedediah," she had whispered once, her hand lost in his. "Not really. You're still back there in that raid. You never came home." The raid. It was always the raid. 5 years ago, he'd been a U.S. Marshal, respected and feared. He and his partner, Marcus Miller, had led a posse against a counterfeiting ring run by 2 brothers, Thomas and Silas Kane. The intelligence was bad. The setup was an ambush. In the chaos of gunfire and smoke, a young man, Thomas Kane, the elder brother, had reached for something in his coat. Jedediah had fired. It was only after the smoke cleared that he saw what Thomas had been reaching for, not a gun, but a letter. An unarmed man dead by his hand. The guilt had been a cancer. It ate away at his confidence, his marriage, his soul. He'd resigned his commission a week later, unable to bear the weight of the star. Miller had argued against it, telling him it was a clean shoot, a mistake anyone could have made in the heat of the moment. But Jedediah knew the truth. He had been too quick, too eager. He had killed an innocent man. Sarah had tried to reach him, but he had pushed her away, wrapping himself in a shroud of whiskey and silence. She had faded from his life, like a photograph left in the sun, and a year after he'd turned in his badge, she was gone, taken by a fever that her weary spirit had no strength to fight. Jedediah. Dr. Evans' voice pulled him back to the present. The stitching is done. You need to rest. No riding for at least a couple of days. Jedediah sat up, ignoring the sharp protest from his side. Rest was a luxury he couldn't afford. Silas Kane wasn't just running. He was plotting. Every move he made was a piece in a larger, crueler game. There's a federal bounty on his head now, Brody said, holding out a poster. The name Silas Kane was printed in bold black letters above a sketch that captured the man's cruel intelligence. $500. Alive. Jedediah looked at the paper, but he didn't see the money. He saw Sarah's face. He saw the glint of the silver locket in Kane's hand. He had been chasing bounties to run from his past, to fill the hollowness inside him with coin. But this was different. This was not about running anymore. It was about facing the ghost he had created 5 years ago. He pushed himself to his feet, his body aching, but his resolve hardening into something unbreakable. It's not about the money, Sheriff. He said, his voice low and gravelly. He took the poster from Brody's hand, his gaze fixed on the outlaw's face. He made this personal. Now it's a reckoning. Dr. Evans sighed. You'll tear those stitches. They'll hold, Jedediah replied, grabbing his duster. He walked to the door, the pain in his side, a dull throb that anchored him to his purpose. He paused and looked back at the sheriff. Which way did they ride? Brody pointed north toward the unforgiving expanse of the Badlands. Headed for Purgatory Flats. But Jedediah. Kane is smart. He's a viper. Don't let your anger blind you. Jedediah nodded, but he knew it wasn't just anger driving him. It was something more profound. It was a promise to the woman in the locket, a promise to reclaim the last piece of a life he had allowed to be destroyed. He stepped out into the harsh sunlight of redemption, the bounty poster clutched in his hand. This wasn't a hunt for justice or money. It was a pilgrimage into the heart of his own darkness. This was his fight now, and he would see it through to the end. The trail north was a scar of churned earth and horse droppings leading directly into the teeth of the Badlands. The sun beat down on the cracked alkali flats, where sun-bleached cattle skulls marked forgotten trails. Jedediah rode with a singular focus, the pain in his side a constant rhythmic reminder of his purpose. He ignored Dr. Evans's advice, knowing that every hour he rested was an hour Silas Kane used to get further away, to weave another knot in his intricate web of vengeance. 2 days later, he reached Purgatory Flats, a town that lived up to its name. It was a desolate collection of warped timber buildings huddled around a single muddy street, smelling of cheap whiskey and desperation. The local law was housed in a clapboard shack with a crooked sign that read, Sheriff Barlow. Barlow was a large, florid man with a tin star pinned loosely to a sweat-stained vest. His smile was wide and welcoming, but his eyes were small and shifty, constantly darting around as if looking for an escape route. Jedediah Kane. He boomed, extending a beefy hand. Heard you were coming. A man like Silas Kane stirs up dust that travels for miles. Jedediah ignored the hand. He came through here with 4 men, riding hard. That they did, Barlow confirmed, leaning back in his creaking chair. Came through yesterday morning. Bought supplies, fresh horses, and were gone before the church bells rang. Seemed in a powerful hurry. He gestured to a map on his wall. They rode west from here, toward Apache territory. Fool's errand, if you ask me. The desert out there will swallow them whole. Something felt wrong. Kane was meticulous. Riding into Apache land without a plan was reckless, and Kane was anything but. Jedediah studied the sheriff. Barlow was too eager, his story too neat. You talk to them. Just their leader. Polite fellow for a killer. Quoted scripture at me. Barlow chuckled. Said something about the wicked fleeing when no man pursueth. Then he paid in gold coin and was on his way. Jedediah's gaze swept the small office. He saw the corner of a crate peeking out from under a tarp. It was stamped with the name of a mining company known to use high-grade dynamite. On Barlow's desk, next to a half-empty bottle, sat a freshly opened box of expensive cigars, the same brand Silas Kane was known to favor. The pieces clicked into place with the cold certainty of a pistol hammer being cocked. Barlow wasn't just unhelpful. He was on Kane's payroll. He's playing you for a fool, Barlow. Jedediah said, his voice flat and dangerous. Or paying you. Barlow's smile vanished. He straightened up his hand, drifting casually toward the gun on his hip. Now hold on, Kane. That's a serious accusation. I'm the law in this town. The law. Jedediah took a step closer, his presence seeming to shrink the small room. You sent me west into a dead end, while Kane rode east. He's probably halfway to the rail line by now. He bought your cooperation with a box of cigars and a handful of gold, and you sold out for it. Panic flickered in the sheriff's eyes. You've got no proof? I don't need proof. Jedediah countered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I know men like you. You take the easy way, the profitable way. But you made a mistake. You took the side of a man who was being hunted by someone with nothing to lose. Barlow's hand tightened on his gun. Get out of my office, Kane, and get out of my town. Jedediah didn't move. He let the silence stretch a taut wire of tension between them. He could draw on Barlow, end this here and now. It would be simple, justifiable. But that was the old way, the way that had led him to ruin. He was a hunter, not a lawman, but the instincts remained. He needed information, not another body on his conscience. Slowly, deliberately, Jedediah turned his back on the sheriff and walked toward the door. Barlow let out a shaky breath, mistaking the move for retreat. It was exactly what Jedediah had intended. As his hand touched the doorknob, he spun around his Colt, already drawn and leveled at Barlow's chest, before the sheriff could even clear his holster. Let's try this again. Jedediah said, his voice as cold as a grave. Which way did he really go? Barlow froze, his face draining of color. The folksy charade was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a cornered animal. East. He squeaked, his hands shooting into the air. He said he was going to hit the V&T rail line at Carson Pass. He's planning to derail a train carrying a federal payroll. He was babbling now, the words tumbling out. He paid me to send you west to give him a 2-day head start. He said you were relentless. He said that, did he? Jedediah's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just a derailment. It was another performance, and Jedediah was the intended audience. A federal payroll robbery would bring the full weight of the U.S. government down on this territory and on anyone associated with the pursuit. It was a move designed to create chaos, to muddy the waters. "Don't kill me," Barlow pleaded. "I've got a family." Jedediah looked at the man, a pathetic, sweating coward who had sold his badge for a pittance. He felt a surge of contempt, but killing him would solve nothing. He holstered his Colt. "Get on your horse and ride out. Don't stop until you're 100 miles from here. If I ever see your face again, I'll finish what we started." Barlow didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled out from behind his desk and fled the office, leaving the town of Purgatory Flats without a lawman. Jedediah stood alone in the silence, the map on the wall showing the clear path east. He had lost a day, but he had gained a crucial piece of the puzzle. Silas wasn't just running. He was setting traps. And he knew intimate details about Jedediah's past, his methods, his reputation as a marshal. This wasn't just revenge for a brother's death. This was a chess game, and Silas was trying to stay 3 moves ahead. Jedediah walked out into the oppressive heat, his resolve colder and harder than ever. The game was on. The trail east cut through a landscape of stark, brutal beauty. Jedediah pushed his horse, making up for lost time, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and memory. Silas's knowledge of him was a ghost at his back, a constant, unnerving presence. How did he know so much about his past, his methods, even his reputation for being relentless? He followed the clues Silas left behind, a trail of breadcrumbs, meant only for him. A way station robbed, but the owner left alive, beaten, but able to deliver a message. He said to tell the ex-marshal that the scales of justice are slow, but they grind exceedingly fine. At a river crossing, he found a dead man, one of Barlow's deputies, shot in the back. Pinned to his chest was a playing card, the ace of spades. A message of death, but also a callback to a poker game Jedediah and his old partner Miller used to play. Every detail was a calculated psychological blow. The land grew greener as he rode, transitioning from desert to rolling plains dotted with cattle. He was entering ranching country. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, he crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. It was too thick for a campfire. He urged his horse into a gallop, his instincts screaming that Silas had struck again. He found a ranch house, its barn engulfed in flames. Men and women were frantically forming a bucket brigade from a nearby well, their faces grim with exhaustion. A woman stood apart from the others, directing the effort with a calm, steely authority. She was tall and lean, her face weathered by the sun, her hands calloused from work. She held a rifle, as if it were an extension of her own arm. Jedediah dismounted. "Silas Kane?" he asked, his voice rough. The woman turned her gaze sharp and appraising. "They rode through an hour ago. Set fire to the barn, tried to run off my stock. We stopped them, but not before they did this." Her voice was blunt, businesslike, with no trace of panic. "Who are you?" "The man hunting him, Jedediah Kane." Her eyes flickered with recognition. "The bounty hunter. My name is Abigail Vance. This is my land." She gestured to the burning barn. "Kane didn't want my cattle. He just wanted to slow me down, to create a diversion. He asked for me by name. Said I should tell you that a good shepherd knows his flock." Another cryptic message, another piece of a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. Abigail's foreman ran up, his face smudged with soot. "The fire's contained, ma'am, but the barn is a total loss." Abigail nodded, her jaw tight. "See to the animals." She turned back to Jedediah. "You look like you've been through hell and back. Come inside. You can have some water and a hot meal. And you can tell me why a man like Silas Kane is playing games across my land." Inside her modest but sturdy ranch house, Abigail was all pragmatism. She listened intently as Jedediah recounted his pursuit, leaving out the personal details of the locket, but explaining Cain's methodical cruelty. "He's not just an outlaw," she observed, pouring him a cup of coffee. "He's a strategist, and his strategy is centered on you." She looked at him directly. "This is more than a bounty hunt for you, isn't it?" Jedediah didn't answer, instead taking a sip of the scalding coffee. Her shrewdness was unsettling. "My husband was killed 5 years ago," Abigail said quietly, her tough exterior cracking for just a moment. "Caught in the crossfire during a range war. I've been running this ranch alone ever since. I know what it's like to have your life torn apart by violence. And I know the look of a man who's chasing more than just money. You're chasing a ghost." Her words hit closer to home than she could possibly know. He looked around the room, at the simple, well-kept furniture, the mended curtains. It was a home built on resilience, much like the woman herself. "Cain's men cut my fences to the east," she said, her voice returning to its practical tone. "He's trying to funnel my herd into the canyon, create a stampede to block the pass to the rail line. He's not just slowing you down, he's trying to stop you completely." She stood up and walked to a chest in the corner, pulling out a map. "Carson Pass is here. But there's another way. An old mining trail through the mountains. It's dangerous, but it'll cut 2 days off your journey. It will put you ahead of him." She handed him the map, her expression serious. "I want this man stopped, Cain. He threatens everything I've built here. I'll give you fresh supplies and my best horse. You just have to promise me you'll catch him." Jedediah took the map, the worn paper, a fragile truce between two strangers bound by a common enemy. "I'll catch him." As he prepared to leave, Abigail stopped him. "One more thing. One of Cain's men dropped this in the fight." She held out a small leather-bound Bible. It fell from his saddlebag. Jedediah took it, his brow furrowed. It seemed like an odd possession for one of Cain's thugs. He opened it, and tucked inside the front cover was a small faded photograph. His blood ran cold. The photograph showed 2 young men standing side by side, their arms slung over each other's shoulders. They were smiling, full of the foolish confidence of youth. One of them, older and broader, was Thomas Cain, the man Jedediah had shot and killed 5 years ago. The other, younger, with a fire in his eyes that had since hardened into cruel intelligence, was unmistakably Silas. On the back, written in faded ink, were 2 names: Thomas and Silas Cain. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. Silas Cain was Thomas's younger brother. The entire crime spree, the robberies, the cryptic messages, the theft of the locket, it was all a long, elaborate act of revenge. Silas wasn't just destroying towns. He was systematically destroying Jedediah's life, targeting his past, his reputation, and the memory of his wife. This wasn't a mission of greed. It was a mission to avenge a fallen brother. Jedediah finally understood. He wasn't hunting an outlaw. He was being haunted by a ghost of his own making, and the reckoning was coming far sooner than he'd thought. The revelation hit Jedediah like a physical shock. He stared at the photograph, the smiling faces of the Cain brothers mocking him from across the years. He wasn't a hunter. He was the prey. Silas had been orchestrating this entire chase, leading him on a carefully curated tour of his own failures. The weight of his guilt over Thomas Cain's death, a burden he had carried in silence for 5 years, now felt heavier than ever. It was the foundation upon which Silas had built his entire empire of revenge. Armed with Abigail Vance's map and a fresh, powerful stallion, Jedediah rode into the mountains. The old mining trail was treacherous, a narrow ledge carved into the sheer rock face, but he pushed onward, fueled by a new desperate urgency. He was no longer just trying to catch Silas. He was trying to get ahead of him to reclaim control of a narrative that had been ruthlessly stolen from him. He rode for a day and a night, stopping only to rest the horse. The air grew thin and cold. The silence of the high peaks was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through the pines. It gave him too much time to think. He saw Sarah's disappointed eyes, heard Miller's hollow reassurances, felt the phantom weight of the marshal's star on his chest. He had thought running from his past would erase it. Instead, it had given it time to fester, to grow into the monstrous form of Silas Kane. As he descended from the mountains, he saw the glint of the V&T rail line in the valley below. He had beaten Silas to Carson Pass. He found a defensible position in a rocky outcropping overlooking a sharp bend in the track, a perfect spot for an ambush. He settled in to wait, the cold stone at his back, a welcome anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Hours later they arrived. Silas and his men rode into the pass with confident arrogance. They began laying dynamite along the tracks with practiced efficiency. But Jedediah noticed something was wrong. There were only 3 men with Silas now. One was missing. A cold dread washed over him. Silas was too smart for a straightforward confrontation. This had to be another misdirection, another layer to his cruel game. While Jedediah was racing through the mountains, Silas must have sent his other men elsewhere. But where? The answer came in a cloud of dust from the west, a lone rider galloping toward him, not from the direction of Purgatory Flats, but from redemption. It was one of Abigail Vance's ranch hands, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Kane," he yelled, reining in his horse. "It's Redemption Kane," he circled back. He never intended to hit the train. It was a feint. He rode into town this morning and took the doctor's daughter. The world tilted on its axis. Emily, Dr. Evans' quiet, kind-hearted daughter. Jedediah felt a surge of self-loathing so intense it nearly buckled him. He had been so focused on his own ghosts, on his own pain, that he had walked right into Silas's trap. Silas hadn't wanted to stop him. He had wanted to lure him away, leaving Redemption vulnerable. The ranch hand held out a piece of paper. "He left this for you, pinned to the clinic door." Jedediah's hands trembled as he took the note. The handwriting was elegant, mocking. "Jedediah, a man reaps what he sows. Your sin begat my grief, and now your pursuit has endangered the innocent. A fitting symmetry, don't you think? If you wish to see the girl again, come to the place where your own hope died. The old church on Serenity Bluff. Come alone. Midnight. The final judgment awaits." Serenity Bluff. The abandoned, dilapidated church on the cliff edge overlooking Redemption. The place where Sarah was buried. Silas hadn't just raised the stakes. He had moved the entire game to holy ground, forcing a final confrontation in the one place Jedediah held sacred. He was turning his last cherished memory into a battlefield. It was the cruelest, most personal blow yet. Jedediah looked from the note to the men on the tracks below, who were still working oblivious. They were nothing but a distraction. The real endgame was waiting for him back where it all began. He mounted his horse, his face a mask of cold fury. "Tell Sheriff Brody to gather a posse and meet me at the base of the bluff," he told the ranch hand. "But tell him not to make a move until he hears my signal. This is my fight to finish." He rode like a man, possessed, the wind tearing at his face. Sarah's name a silent prayer on his lips. This was no longer about a locket or a bounty, or even the ghost of Thomas Kane. It was about saving an innocent life and putting an end to the cycle of vengeance he had started 5 years ago. As he galloped toward redemption, the sky began to darken storm clouds, gathering on the horizon, mirroring the tempest in his soul. Midnight was coming. The storm broke as Jedediah reached the base of Serenity Bluff. Rain lashed down, turning the trail to mud, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the skeletal frame of the abandoned church perched on the cliff edge. It looked like a profane monument to his own failures. He dismounted, telling Brody and his nervous posse to wait for the sound of the church bell, his signal. Then he began the ascent alone, a ghost climbing toward his own Golgotha. He moved with the stealth of his martial days, using the rocks and twisted cedars for cover. 2 of Cain's men guarded the entrance, their silhouettes stark against the broken stained glass windows. He circled around to the back, finding a crumbling section of the stone wall he could climb. The wind howled, masking the sound of his movements. Inside the church was a cavern of shadows and decay. Rain poured through holes in the roof, pooling on the dusty floor. At the far end, by the ruined altar, Silas Cain stood with Emily Evans. A rope was tied around her wrists, and Silas held the other end, a pistol pressed lightly against her temple. A single lantern cast a ghastly, flickering light on their faces. "You're late, Marshal," Silas said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He sounded calm, almost serene. "I was beginning to think you had lost your famous resolve." Emily was trying to be brave, but her eyes were wide with terror. "Jedediah, don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's all right, Emily." Jedediah said, his voice steady despite the thunderous beating of his heart. He kept his hands away from his gun, showing he was not an immediate threat. "Let her go, Cain. This is between you and me. It always has been." Silas smiled, a chillingly pleasant expression. "Everything in its time. First, a confession. Not from me, but from you. I want you to say his name, my brother's name. I want you to tell this innocent girl why you murdered him." The word "murdered" struck Jedediah with the force of a bullet. It was a mistake. He ground out the old shame rising like bile in his throat. He reached for something. "I thought it was a gun." "You thought." Silas sneered, his calm cracking to reveal the seething rage beneath. "A U.S. Marshal, a man of the law, didn't see. He thought. And for that thought, my brother Thomas, who never harmed a soul in his life, lay dead in the dirt." He pulled the rope tighter, making Emily gasp. "Your guilt has been your prison for 5 years, hasn't it, Cain? It cost you your star. It cost you your wife. I have merely been the instrument of a justice you brought upon yourself." Lightning flashed, illuminating the twisted agony on Silas's face. "I wanted you to feel what I felt," he whispered. "To have everything you love stripped away, to be left with nothing but ghosts." "You've made your point," Jedediah said, taking a slow step forward. "You've won. Now let the girl go." "Oh, but the lesson isn't over." Silas said, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. "There is one final terrible truth you must learn. You see, you carry the guilt for a sin that wasn't even yours." Jedediah froze. "What are you talking about?" "I was there that day," Silas said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Hidden in the loft. I saw everything. Thomas wasn't reaching for a letter. He was reaching for a ledger to prove he was trying to get out, to expose the men who forced him into the counterfeiting scheme. But you didn't fire the fatal shot." The world seemed to stop. The rain, the wind, the thunder, it all faded away. "It was Miller who fired," Silas hissed, savoring every word. "Your partner. He saw Thomas reach for the ledger and he panicked. Fired a second before you did. His bullet was the one that killed my brother. He was ambitious, your Marcus Miller. A dead body was a complication he couldn't afford, so he let you take the blame. He built his distinguished career as a respected sheriff on your guilt on my family's ruin. The revelation shattered Jedediah's world. The guilt that had been his constant companion, the defining tragedy of his life, was a lie. He was not a killer. He was a scapegoat. The foundation of his brokenness crumbled, and in its place, a white-hot righteous fury rose. He looked at Silas, no longer seeing the specter of his past, but a man twisted by a grief that had been misdirected from the very beginning. At that moment, the church bell in the tower, battered by the wind, let out a single, mournful toll. Midnight. The sound broke the spell. Jedediah reacted on pure instinct. He dived to the side as Silas, startled, fired his pistol, the bullet screaming past Jedediah's ear and shattering a stone angel on the wall. Jedediah came up firing not at Silas, but at the rope in his hand, severing it with a single expert shot. "Run, Emily," he yelled. Emily scrambled away as Silas, enraged, turned his gun back on Jedediah. The two men exchanged fire, the roar of their pistols deafening in the enclosed space. Lightning flashes provided the only light, freezing them in monstrous tableaus, two men locked in a dance of death, their faces masks of grim determination. Jedediah used the crumbling pews as cover his movements, tactical, precise. He was a marshal again. He winged Silas in the shoulder, causing the outlaw to cry out in pain and drop his pistol. Jedediah closed the distance, his own gun leveled. He had him. Beaten. Disarmed. Vengeance was his for the taking. He could end it all right here. But as he looked into Silas Kane's eyes, he didn't see a monster. He saw a broken man, consumed by a lie, just as he himself had been. Killing him wouldn't be justice. It would just be another death, another ghost to haunt the long nights. He had been given his life back tonight, freed from a prison of false guilt. He would not celebrate that freedom by becoming the killer everyone thought he was. Slowly, Jedediah lowered his Colt. He had to choose between vengeance and saving a life, his own. He broke the cycle. "It's over, Silas." He said, his voice heavy with the weight of 5 wasted years. The fight was done. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. By the time Sheriff Brody and his posse stormed the church, they found Jedediah standing over a wounded but living Silas Kane with Emily Evans, wrapped safely in a dusty altar cloth, shaken but unharmed. The fight was over, but the reckoning had just begun. Jedediah handed Silas over to the federal authorities, who arrived the next day, drawn by the news of the foiled train robbery. He gave a sworn deposition detailing Silas's confession, every last word, about Thomas Kane's death and Sheriff Marcus Miller's betrayal. The confession, coming from the man who had the most to lose by admitting it, was irrefutable. Weeks later, word filtered back to Redemption that Sheriff Miller, a man lauded for his integrity and swift justice, had been arrested. His career, built on a foundation of lies, had crumbled to dust. Redemption began to heal. The bank was repaired, the fear subsided, and life settled back into its familiar rhythms. Dr. Evans, his gratitude boundless, offered Jedediah anything he desired as payment. Jedediah asked for nothing. Saving Emily had been payment enough. He found himself staying, helping with repairs, his hands finding solace in the simple act of building instead of destroying. The townspeople, once wary of the grim bounty hunter, now greeted him with nods of respect and quiet thanks. One afternoon, a polished carriage rolled into town. A high-ranking U.S. Marshal, a man Jedediah had once worked with, stepped out. He carried a small velvet-lined box. "Kane." The Marshal, said, his tone respectful. "In light of recent events and the full exoneration of your conduct in the Kane raid, the department has seen fit to reinstate you. Your badge should you choose to accept it." He opened the box. Inside, gleaming on the velvet, was a silver star. 5 years ago, Jedediah would have given anything for this. It was his identity, his purpose. But now, as he looked at it, he felt nothing but the cold weight of the past. He looked past the marshal at the town of Redemption, at Dr. Evans and Emily, sharing a laugh outside the clinic, at Abigail Vance, riding into town for supplies, giving him a knowing nod. "Thank you, sir," Jedediah said, his voice clear and steady. "But I think my time as a marshal is over. I believe I've found a new post." He gently closed the box and handed it back. He had spent years chasing justice for others while denying it to himself. Now he was ready to find something else. Peace. A week later, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jedediah made one last journey up to Serenity Bluff. The air was clean, washed by the storm. He walked to the simple wooden cross that marked Sarah's grave. For years he had avoided this place, unable to face her memory, without the crushing weight of his guilt. Now he knelt, the earth cool beneath his knees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver locket. It was polished now, the tarnished surface gleaming. He opened it and looked at the smiling face of his wife, her eyes full of a light he finally felt he could honor. "I'm sorry, Sarah." He whispered the words, carried away by the gentle breeze. "For everything. For not coming home when you needed me. I was lost for a long time. But I think I've found my way back." He gently placed the locket on the headstone, letting it rest against the weathered wood. It was not a goodbye, but a promise. He would not forget her, but he would no longer let her memory be a prison. He stood up his shoulders, feeling lighter than they had in years. He was no longer running from his past, but had made peace with it. He turned his back on the grave and walked away, not riding off into the sunset as a lone wandering hero, but heading back toward the warm, welcoming lights of redemption. He had finally found a place to call home.